So today we are exploring a sermon delivered by Trevor Capshaw at Dwell City Church. This was recorded on April 12th, 2026.
Right. And this message is part of a series he titled The Road to Resurrection.
Exactly. And it zeroes in on the Gospel of John, specifically chapter 19, verses 1 through 16. For those of you familiar with history, this is the infamous minute-by-minute account of Jesus standing trial before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, we are looking at a deeply textured piece of ancient literature here. I mean, it functions as a historical record of a capital trial, but also a political thriller and a theological manifesto all woven together.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Capsule doesn't just ease us into the theology. He drops us right into the middle of the ultimate kangaroo court.
Oh, absolutely. The scene is just pure, chaotic injustice.
It really is. Pilate, the man holding all legal authority in the room, explicitly declares Jesus innocent. And he doesn't just whisper it to his aides, he announces it 3 separate times on the public record.
Yeah.
3 times! And yet he immediately turns around and orders the man to be severely flogged, dressed in a purple robe, crowned with thorns, and just publicly beaten by soldiers.
His contradiction there is glaring. I mean, from a purely judicial standpoint, it is a complete breakdown of Roman law.
Totally.
Roman governors were supposed to embody the blind justice of the empire,
Yeah.
you know. But Pilate is operating entirely on fear.
See, I always pictured Pilate as this powerful, untouchable Roman elite. But looking at the mechanics of this text, his situation it's much more fragile.
Oh, incredibly fragile.
It feels less like a judge dispensing law and more like, I don't know, a CEO caught in a fatal PR crisis.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Only in this case, if he fails to appease his board of directors, meaning Rome, he doesn't just lose his job, he gets liquidated.
Literally. He's got this angry mob whipped into a frenzy by the local religious leaders, and keep in mind, it's Passover week.
Right. The city is absolutely packed with pilgrims.
Exactly. So if a riot breaks out under his watch, the emperor is going to have his head.
What's fascinating here is how Capshaw frames that exact political panic.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't view Pilate's cowardice as just some unfortunate accident of history.
No, he argues that this blatant failure of justice is actually prophetic fulfillment.
Wait, how does he make that leap?
Well, to make this point, the sermon pulls in the prophet Isaiah, specifically chapter 53, verse 5.
Okay.
And this is a text written centuries before the Roman Empire even existed. It describes a suffering servant whose physical wounds or stripes, as it says, would somehow bring spiritual healing to a broken world.
Wow. That completely reframes the entire courtroom scene. Instead of Pilate just losing control of a mob, Capshaw is arguing that God is orchestrating the chaos. Like the injustice is the mechanism for the cure.
Exactly. The trial itself becomes this sort of theological theater. Pilate physically brings out this beaten defendant onto the Gabbatha, the stone pavement where the judge's seat sits.
Right.
And he creates this open-air spectacle to essentially mock the Jewish hope for a king, showing them a bloody, helpless man.
And he announces to the crowd, "Behold the man." And just reading it as history, Pilate is clearly trying to show how pathetic Jesus looks. Like, look at this guy. He couldn't conquer a toll booth, let alone the Roman Empire. Are we really doing this?
Yeah, exactly. He's ridiculing him.
But Capshaw hits the brakes on the narrative right there.
Yeah.
He isolates that exact phrase, "behold the man," and attaches a massive theological weight to it.
He leverages that phrase to introduce the concept of the true man. And in this theological framework, you really can't understand Jesus without looking backward to the very first human.
Adam, in the book of Genesis.
Right. Capshaw references the Apostle Paul's writings in Romans 5 to establish a mirror image here.
Okay, lay that out for me.
So Adam was placed in a garden of life, right? But his disobedience brought a curse of death upon humanity. Jesus, on the other hand, is placed in a trial of death. But his perfect obedience brings the offer of life.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because I always assumed the baseline rule for religion was essentially a cosmic grading curve.
A grading curve.
Yeah, like if my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds, or at the very least, if I'm not acting like a complete monster compared to the guy next door, I'll pass the final test.
Ah, right. The sort of good enough standard.
Exactly. But Capshaw is arguing that this true man concept completely shatters the curve. Because if the standard isn't try your hardest, but absolute flawless obedience to God, then every single person fails.
Yeah, the curve is a myth in this theology.
Yeah.
If absolute perfection is the only passing grade, humanity is collectively condemned.
Which sounds pretty hopeless.
It does. But this dilemma sets up a mechanism Capshaw refers to as the Great Exchange. And this is actually an idea he attributes to a previous message by a colleague named Pastor Steve.
I am kind of stuck on the logistics of how that exchange actually functions, though. Like, if the curve is destroyed and everyone fails, what replaces it? Do we just accept the zero?
Well, think of it like walking into a courtroom with a mountain of financial debt, debt that you could never possibly repay in 10 lifetimes.
Okay. So I'm bankrupt.
Right. And the judge doesn't just wave a magic wand and forgive the debt, because the law still requires payment. The books have to balance.
Right. Justice has to happen.
Exactly. So instead, a perfectly innocent billionaire walks in, assumes all of your crushing debt as his own, and then transfers his limitless bank account into your name.
Oh, wow. So Jesus takes the punishment and the shame that humanity earned, and in exchange, he hands over his perfect record as righteousness to humanity.
A literal swap of records, yeah.
And Kopschel anchors that massive abstract idea with this brilliant literary detail from the text, the crown of thorns.
The crown of thorns, yes.
Because the soldiers weave it together as a joke, right? Just to mock a fake king. But Kapschel points out that back in Genesis 3, when humanity first rebelled, the physical curse placed upon the ground was that it would produce thorns and thistles.
Yes. The visual metaphor there is just stunning.
It really is. When Jesus wears that crown, he is literally wearing the physical manifestation of humanity's curse on his head.
It totally elevates the violence. I mean, it's not just Roman cruelty anymore. It is the culmination of a narrative arc that started in the very first pages of the human story.
But stepping back for a second, this creates massive friction regarding how we understand human suffering.
How so?
Well, if Jesus is this perfectly innocent, true man, and he is willingly walking into this horrific injustice, why doesn't he stop it? Even Pilate gets incredibly frustrated with his silence during the trial.
Right, Pilate threatens him.
Yeah. He says, "Don't you know I have the authority to release you or to crucify you?"
And Jesus finally responds to that threat by telling Pilate, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above."
See, my natural instinct in that moment, if I'm standing before a judge who has repeatedly declared me innocent but is clearly wavering under political pressure, is to negotiate.
Oh, of course. Anybody would.
I would be leveraging every single ounce of that innocence. I'd be pointing out the legal loopholes, appealing to Roman law, doing whatever it takes to survive. I mean, if someone leaves a door cracked open, you kick it down and escape. Why does he refuse to play the game?
Because playing the game implies that safety and comfort are the ultimate goals. Kapschel argues that Jesus' silence is an active dismantling of the Western obsession with karma.
Karma, the idea that the universe functions on this simple input-output mechanism.
Exactly.
Like, I put good energy into the world, I eat my vegetables, I don't steal, and in return, the universe rewards me with health and prosperity.
Which is precisely the opposite of what is happening in this courtroom. I mean, you have the most innocent, obedient person to ever walk the earth, and his reward is a Roman torture device.
Right. It completely breaks the karma model.
And Kapschel uses a very sharp analogy here. He calls the transactional view of God piñata theology.
Piñata theology, I love that. It's the belief that God is just hanging in the sky, holding all the treats. And our good deeds, our prayers, our moral behavior, those are the stick.
Yep.
If we swing hard enough and hit the piñata just right, God will burst open and dispense the candy. You know, the easy life, the successful career, the perfect family.
But the danger of piñata theology really reveals itself when tragedy strikes. If you get sick or lose your job or face some sort of deep injustice, that framework forces you into one of two terrible conclusions.
What are they?
Well, either you didn't hit the piñata hard enough, meaning you secretly deserved the suffering, or the piñata is broken, meaning God has lost control of the universe.
Yeah. And Jesus shatters both of those options. By telling Pilate that God gave him his authority, he is claiming that God is sovereign even over the blatant injustice of a corrupt judge. Sometimes the righteous suffer horribly, and the wicked seem to win. But if God is still in control during the nightmare, it implies that suffering is not random punishment. It can have a profound, mysterious purpose outside of our immediate comfort.
And to fully grasp the purpose of this specific suffering, the sermon forces us to look at the calendar.
The calendar.
Yeah. The Gospel of John goes out of its way to note the exact timing of this trial. It is the day of preparation for the Passover, specifically around the 6th hour.
Oh, that is definitely not a throwaway detail. That is the exact window of time when the Jewish priests in the temple would be slaughtering the Passover lambs to prepare for the massive feast that evening.
Right. Capsule leverages that timing to introduce a theological principle known as progressive revelation.
Which is what, exactly?
It's the idea that God doesn't drop the entire truth on humanity all at once. Instead, he slow drips the plan over centuries, using patterns, symbols, and repetition.
And this leads to my absolute favorite analogy from the source material.
The turkey.
The Thanksgiving turkey. Capsule tries to explain the psychological toll of that ancient sacrificial system by comparing it to modern holidays. He says, imagine if, instead of swinging by the grocery store to pick up a frozen Thanksgiving turkey, the requirement was that you had to bring a live turkey into your home.
Oh, man.
Right. You raise it in your living room, your kids name it, they feed it, they get emotionally attached to it, and then when the holiday arrives, you have to personally slit its throat in your backyard.
It sounds totally absurd to modern ears,
Mm-hmm.
but it captures the visceral, bloody reality of ancient temple worship. It was designed to be exhausting.
That emotional fatigue is the point. I mean, if you had to kill a family pet every single year to clear your conscience, eventually you would just collapse under the weight of it. You'd be screaming, there has to be a better way. I cannot keep doing this.
Right. And that exhaustion creates the longing for a permanent solution. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Capsule traces this specific pattern of the substitute lamb backwards through the text.
Where does he start?
He points back to Genesis 22, where Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac. But God intervenes and provides a ram whose horns are caught in a thicket of thorns.
Oh, Florence again.
Thorns again. Then he jumps to Exodus 12, the original Passover, where the blood of a lamb is painted on the doorposts of the Israelites so that God's judgment would literally pass over their homes in Egypt.
So it's centuries of repetition, millions of lambs, all funneling down to this specific hour on the stone pavement.
Exactly.
It gives profound context to what John the Baptist shouted earlier in the story when he saw Jesus. Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world.
Jesus is positioned as the final piece of the puzzle. He's the ultimate, spotless substitute who absorbs the judgment, permanently ending that exhausting cycle of trying to appease a holy God with endless bloodshed.
And all of this theological architecture, the true man, the great exchange, the final Passover lamb, it all collides in the absolute climax of the trial. Pilate brings Jesus out to the stone pavement one last time, looks at the angry mob and says, behold your king.
And the response from the religious leaders is just chilling.
It really is.
I mean, these are men who have devoted their entire lives to studying the scriptures, waiting for God to send a promised Messiah from the royal line of David. Yet, in their blind hatred for this specific man, they commit ultimate religious treason. They shout back, we have no king but Caesar.
It is staggering hypocrisy. They demand a violent, pagan, worldly dictator over the spiritual kingdom Jesus is offering, and they push it even further. They don't just ask for an execution, they demand crucifixion.
Right, the method matters.
It does, because under their own ancient law, Deuteronomy 21, verse 23, anyone who is hung on a tree is considered cursed by God. They want Jesus spiritually invalidated. They want him completely erased.
The irony is that in their attempt to curse him, they are unwittingly completing the mechanism of the great exchange we discussed earlier.
Right, taking the curse.
Yeah. But Capsule doesn't let his audience just sit back and judge those ancient crowds. He uses this historical declaration of loyalty to pivot the spotlight directly onto the listeners.
So what does this all mean? Like, for someone sitting in a pew in 2026, how does an ancient political riot become a mirror?
Well, he asks the congregation a series of highly invasive questions to prove that modern people make the exact same choice the crowd did. We are constantly swearing allegiance to our own versions of Caesar.
Give me an example.
He says, think about your own bank statement from last month. If someone hacked into your account right now and analyzed where every dollar went, what kingdom would they assume you were funding?
Ouch.
Right. Or if they scroll through your internet history, or even if they just watched how you react when a server at a restaurant completely messes up your order, who would they say is ruling your heart?
Wow. The ultimate challenge of the sermon really rests on a paradox, doesn't it?
Very much so.
Because in this framework, true power does not look like Caesar. It doesn't look like crushing your enemies or climbing the corporate ladder or dominating the culture. True victory actually looks like defeat. It looks like a man willingly wearing a crown of thorns and bleeding for the very people screaming for his death. The listener has to decide if they are willing to behold that kind of king.
That's the crux of it.
So, to synthesize this whole journey we've been on for you, we've watched how a modern speaker takes a chaotic, deeply unjust Roman trial and reveals the theological blueprints hidden underneath the pavement. We've connected the curse of ancient thorns to tools of Roman torture.
And we've explored how the emotional trauma of a Thanksgiving turkey explains the finality of the Passover lamb.
Right. We've seen how a refusal to leverage innocence completely dismantles pinata theology and our obsession with karma, and it all boils down to a single, terrifying test of human loyalty.
So consider this final thought to mull over, even if you analyze this entirely outside of a religious framework.
Okay, lay it on us.
The ancient crowds chose Caesar that day because Caesar represented a familiar transactional system. He was a safe bet in a brutal world. He offered order, even if that order required oppression and violence.
He was the devil they knew, the system they understood how to navigate.
Exactly, which is exactly the kind of trap we fall into today.
Yeah.
So, what are the modern Caesars in your life? What are the systems of safety, the pursuits of status, or the demands for social conformity that you blindly swear loyalty to?
Just because it's easier.
Right. How often do you surrender your deepest values to a corrupt system simply because the alternative asks you to step out of your comfort zone, embrace vulnerability, and give up your illusion of control?
It is a heavy mirror to look into. It makes you wonder if that joke about the mother crying at the beginning of the sermon wasn't really a joke at all. Maybe the tears are just what happens when someone looks closely at their own internet history or realizes they've been worshiping a piñata. Either way, it's a brilliant, challenging piece of architecture. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep asking the big questions, and we'll see you next time.